Okay, cool. Thank you all for your patience. I'm very excited to introduce Jessica McCurdy. I'll say before I do the full intro that if you happened to be at the EAGX in Oxford last week and saw Joan Gass present, this presentation does have a fair amount of overlap with that, and so it might not be the best use of your time. Jessica studied cognitive science at Yale University with a focus on moral psychology and altruism. She was on a community building grant working full-time for Yale Effective Altruism, where she developed a love for operations and community building. She now works for the Center for Effective Altruism, coordinating groups across the world. Join me in welcoming Jessica. Hello.
McKinsey spends about $1 million per campus per year recruiting students. And this is the norm at elite professional services, at McKinsey, Goldman Sachs, Facebook, etc. Meanwhile, students these days care more about doing good in the world than any generation beforehand. And at the same time, college career offices aren't helping them. Oftentimes, they are giving unrigorous advice, such as follow your passion, or handing out Peace Corps brochures. We are failing an entire generation of students who are ambitious and want to do good in the world. And right now, all that they're seeing are things that are spending tons of money so that they can go work in tech and consulting. So in this presentation, I want to talk about why I think that universities seem particularly promising for community building. I'm going to give you a work in progress 2024 vision of what EA at universities might look like. I'll say why this might be an especially good option for you to do right now. Since it's an EA talk, I'll also mention why it might not be a good option for you right now. And lastly, some ways that you can test your fit and get involved so you can see whether it's the right option for you. So I think that university is a really critical window of time for people to get involved in EI. It's the first time that they're thinking about their life priorities with the freedom to figure out how they want to make a difference in the world. They're thinking about their values and exploring what that means for their career path. They're forming influential peer groups that are going to have an impact on them for the rest of their lives. And critically, they're not locked into anything yet. In a lot of American universities, people don't even have to choose their major until 2 years in. And some of us, including me, changed our majors a couple of times as well. And this is really key because as students are being introduced to these ideas, and it has an influence on what they might do with their lives, they actually have the flexibility to make those changes in their major, in their career plan, etc. So it's still possible later on for people to make these shifts, but it's a lot harder. And since we are EA, though, I have a graph for you because we like our data. So over here on the y-axis is the level of EA engagement, and on the x-axis is the age at which people first joined EA. So as you see that people around the ages of 18 to 22 that found out about EA are more likely to be more engaged. And this is mirrored by some evidence at the Open Philanthropy Project Long-Termist Community Building team that surveyed around 200 promising long-termists and found that the average age that they got involved with EA was about 20. And in fact, they actually said that they wish they had gotten involved earlier, on average around 16. So as you can see, I think it's clear that this university bracket is like a really influential time for people and really good for getting people involved in EA. So I'm going to give you kind of a work in progress vision of what we might see in the year 2024. We're basing this on current evidence, and we'll update it as we learn more, but I think that this is a really plausible vision. So in 2024, I think it is very plausible that we will have flourishing EA groups at the top 200 universities around the world. So not just the universities in the US and in Europe, but also ones such as the IITs in India or the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil. And all over at these places, a majority of the students on their campus are hearing about EA ideas. Maybe the booth at their club fair that they remember the most is their EA booth, or they get a really catchy flyer advertising a rigorous 8-week reading group in which they learn how they can do the most good with their careers. And importantly is that these students are just being introduced to these ideas. It's not that we're trying to convert people to these ideas or anything. We're introducing really important economic and philosophical considerations that can have a really big impact on their life. And I think that it's very plausible, and at least is the case for me, that these students could be having some of those meaningful conversations of their college career at these university groups. And lastly, these students at these top 200 universities are all being connected to really exciting opportunities, internships, job opportunities, learning opportunities, where they can go on to have a ton of impact in the world. And importantly, at these universities, these group leaders are not starting from scratch. That's why we have our university group Accelerator program. So that takes a school that has 2 people who are interested in starting a group, and it helps them with a mentor and funding and stipend and resources so that they can run one of these great quality 8-week reading programs. And I'll talk about it a little bit more, but it will be opening for applications in the summer. So very excited about that. Okay, and just to give a little bit of background on why I think this is really plausible in our current trajectory, in spring 2021, there were 15 schools that were running these 8-week reading programs. In 2022, fall, there were 65 schools running these 8-week reading programs. Sorry, this is supposed to be fall of 2021. But I think in 2024, it's really plausible that this will be tripled into 200 schools or more. And in addition to this, I think that it's plausible that the Open Philanthropy Project will have funded around a dozen campus centers at key universities where they have their own designated office space, they have people working full-time, and we already have the startings of this at Oxford, Cambridge, Stanford, and we're getting it going here at Harvard too, so very exciting. But the thing is we can do so much more. With ambitious entrepreneurs like those of you in this room, I think that we can really build out this model to be a lot better. So we like to think that we're writing a book on field building in universities. And right now we have our first chapter. It's pretty good, seems to replicate decently, but there's a lot more to learn. And it's going to be up to you guys to help us fill out the rest of this book. So I think it's really plausible that someone in this room could go on to do any of these following projects that I'd be very excited to see. Maybe one of you will go on to create a pre-orientation program for incoming first-year students, one that's piloted about social impact, and then you work on it and test it, and then scale it up so that it goes to those 200 universities. One of you could work with your professors at your school to make sure that EA-aligned content is happening in all of the top courses that all of the first years have to take so that everyone is hearing about these important ideas. And some of you could be running such great career programming that your career offices start getting jealous and copying what you're doing. And the kicker here, or the thing that's really exciting, is that I think it's extremely plausible that you are the best positioned to do this. And this is really, really exciting because in most careers, the typical pinnacle of your impact happens when you're in your like 50s or 60s, after decades of specialization, learning about the field. And yet you have this amazing opportunity right now in your early 20s when you're the expert. You know the users on your campus, you know where students like to hang out, you know that they won't walk 10 minutes down the street if there's another option, you know what the best food is to get people to go there. And it means that you have this particular opportunity right now where you're the experts and can be having outsized impact in these years. So some current options of what people are doing right now. There are people who are working part or full-time on their group. So some students are working part-time on top of their studies. Some of them quit their student jobs and are getting paid to do their university field building instead. Others are taking off gap semesters or gap years. Some are sticking around after they graduate and running their group full-time. And some are going on to join campus centers. So an exciting model that there is someone at a university can go and graduate and then leave to a different university that has a campus center and work full-time there. And I think that this is a plausible statement. These could potentially be the highest impact years of your life. Like these next 1 to 2 years, and that's like really exciting. And the reason for this is that we think that university field building is just incredibly impactful. A really big reason for this being multiplier effects. So the idea that I can go on and devote my career to doing good, to solving the world's biggest problems. I could also introduce 5 of my friends to these ideas and have all of them go on to do these things in which I'm multiplying my impact. And as a visualization of this, Joan Gass, who is the managing director of CEA, she had a university group that she was at, and now she has some data on what the people at that university group went on to do, which is quite exciting. So some examples. There are people who went on to help run a charity that was incubated by Charity Entrepreneurship, and now they are a data scientist at the World Bank, influencing many of the world's funding. There's another person that went on to get plant-based foods in fast food restaurants all over the country. Another person had a vital role in COVID-19 response and is now influencing $16 billion in pandemic funding. And one of her favorite examples is someone who came to an EA meetup about a few months before they had to choose what they were going to do with their final thesis on their PhD, and they had to choose advisors. And in their conversations at this group, they decided they wanted to work on emerging technology, which it was a really key moment because if they had come to that meeting a few months later, it would have been too late. They would have been locked in to that choice. And they just started a job at the White House in the fall. So this is just one example, and this was a while ago too. Since then, we have groups that are even bigger, and we have even more resources for students to be going on to do really great things. And you also, in addition to this might be a particularly important moment for field building. So there's a couple reasons for this. One is that if you think that we're going to be bigger soon as a movement, then the especially good opportunities might be happening right now. And secondly, if you think that this is a particularly hingy moment in terms of emerging technologies, maybe if you have short AI timelines, then it's extremely important that we're moving fast and working on these things now. So this is also echoed by some of the people that are experts in the space. So an example is Buck Schlegeris. He is the fund manager at the EA Infrastructure Fund, and he is also the CTO of Redwood Research, which is an AI safety organization. And he went on to write a memo about his views on university field building. And he said that his current guess is that if you are able to do student group organizing, you don't massively hate that type of work, you're at a suitable school that has fewer than 2 full-time equivalents working there right now, then there's more than a 50% chance that an optimal allocation of your time over the course of your undergrad degree would involve you spending at least 1 full-time equivalent year on student group organizing. He goes on to say that it's quite rare for anyone that is university group aged to have a higher impact on the world than, and like really impress him, than those who are running really good student groups. So you might ask, you keep on saying like, me, I can do this. Are you sure? And so I want to give some examples of some people that actually a lot of them are at this conference, so they all inspire me and hopefully inspire you as well. So we have Kuhan, which many of you know. Kuhan was running the Stanford EA group, went on to help run the Stanford Existential Risk Initiative, which had a summer fellows program that received hundreds of applications, becoming more competitive than Stanford itself. Doi, also here, was studying at Durham, graduated, and then moved to Cambridge to work full-time on Cambridge EA, and is now doing tons of field building with, in particular, cause-specific fellowships, which are some of the best opportunities for learning in the space, such as their AGI Safety Fundamentals program, which has a range of students doing it to staff at 80,000 hours in CEA participating as well. Koki is at NYU Abu Dhabi and is really making progress on making really diverse fellowships that fit a range of different nationalities. So they had a fellowship that had people from 17 different countries represented and is working on how do we replicate this so that we can do it around the world. Leilani is here. She was working on UCLA EA, and she noticed that there seemed to be this difference in the fact that we were all agreeing that retreats were like really, really valuable, and yet we just did not have the operations capacity to run all of these retreats. So she applied for an infrastructure fund grant and now has started an organization for running EA retreats. It's currently working on several of them with growing demand and will reach hundreds of attendees this year. Lastly, Jemima and Tom. Jemima's at Durham and Tom is at Manchester. They were running their groups and they noticed that there seemed to be a need for an EA journal for students to submit to. They surveyed over 80 students on whether there was a demand for this and found that 50% of them would submit to this journal. And they're opening for submissions in September. I think these are just really great examples of people who are running their university groups and had entrepreneurial ideas, they saw needs, and they made them happen. And I'll also add that the 3 main organizers of this really awesome event were also all group organizers at their universities as well. So Kuhan, who I just had on the other slide, wrote a really great post on their experience running Stanford EA. And in that post, they say, you, yes, you, can do these things too. We're not that special. We're mostly an unorganized team of students who care a lot, with little experience running much of anything relevant. And they go on to say that the reason of why they want to be doing this is a combination of feeling a strong sense of urgency about the state of the world and what could happen in it, a desire to work really hard to figure out what's the most impactful thing for you to be doing, and taking ideas and implications seriously and figuring out what that means for you particularly in this world. So as you can see, universities seem like a really impactful time. There are a precedent for really ambitious entrepreneurial community builders making really high impacts in their early 20s. But there's also all these other benefits of community building as well. So there's some really great skills that you can develop, such as people management, recruitment, project management, organizational development, and learning how to communicate EA ideas really well. In addition to those transferable skills, there are personal benefits, such as meeting professionals at events like this, developing a really deep understanding of EAI ideas, which is particularly important because it can help you figure out your own cause prioritization. A lot of professionals in the EA space say that they wish they had spent time doing this earlier on and hadn't spent years on something that they think is less important now. And lastly, you can also build a reputation and get referrals. So CEA is constantly receiving asks from different organizations for a list of promising community builders, because community builders have really great entrepreneurial skills, they have deep understandings of EA, and there's a history of promising community builders going on and having really big impact at EA organizations. So this is something where you can get exposure and really get connected within the space for future opportunities. All right, so I said I would go on to say why you might consider not doing this, even though there's these many benefits. And I think this comes to the impact model of what we're doing. So it comes down to how good you think you might be at multiplier effects and what your opportunity cost is, what you would be doing in the time if you were not field building. So if you don't think that you're that good at creating multiplier effects, why might this be? Maybe you're still learning EA ideas, so you're not able to transfer high EA content as well if you need to take some more time to learn. Maybe you have less of a track record of getting people really excited about EA, which means that you might be crowding out someone who could do better. And maybe your university is already saturated and you just have a lot of people working on it. The second side of the model is if you have a particularly high opportunity cost. So this might mean if you have something like an opportunity you can't delay, like a co-founder that needs you right now, or if you have particularly short AI timelines and have the skills to be working on that right now, that might give you a pretty high opportunity cost. So I gave you some lists of reasons why you might want to consider this, some reasons you might not want to consider this. So you might ask, what now? How do I go about testing my fit? How do I get experience? And how do I make that impact that you keep talking about? So some opportunities. One is volunteering at your local university group. So this is a new feature on the EA forum. It's the community page, and it has stars by all of the all the groups in the world, including all the university groups. So you can see if there's one nearby and volunteer there. If you don't have a group yet, then you can start one. This is something I've been working on and I'm really excited about, the University Group Accelerator program, which, in addition to the things I mentioned earlier, also has opportunities for a potential summer internship and retreats. So as I mentioned before, this is going to be opening for applications. If you're at a university that does not have an EA group, come talk to me. Let's make it happen. And we also have tons of resources on our group's resource center from other groups. In addition, there's a group Slack and Facebook group that have tons of things that we've learned from other schools. Once you have a group, you can work on growing it. So the Global Challenges Project has some really great events, such as summits and retreats, where you can both learn a lot more about community building, learn about these cause-specific things. In addition, meeting really cool community builders from around the world. And this opportunity right here, I'm really excited about. It just came out really recently. But if you are looking to work for 10 or more hours a week on your campus group, then you can apply to the Open Philanthropy Project's new fellowship for organizers and get paid for your time. Lastly, you can also try an entrepreneurial community building project like those that I was talking about before. So the Global Challenges Project actually made this whole Airtable deck of project ideas that they really want to see people do and just don't have anyone doing them yet. So we would love to see people in this room take a look at this, maybe find one you might be interested in doing, and apply to the infrastructure fund so that you can get the funds to do that. Additionally, if you are an experienced community builder as well, you can also apply to be a mentor for EAGxB, and that's also a good opportunity to test your fit in being a mentor in that capacity, as well as really pass it forward and help some people that were where you were before. Throughout all of this, maybe the most important one is just to keep learning. We have many great EA virtual programs that are available. I think it's really important that community builders have a really great understanding of EA. It's going to make you more effective at getting other people involved, better at answering their questions or directing them to resources, and also increases your ability to have an impact personally. So EA virtual programs has intro, in-depth, and also these cause-specific fellowships that I was talking about before as well. The Global Challenges Project also has a really great library online of content for reading and learning a bunch more about EI. All right. So to wrap up, I want to end with an anecdote. So in 2015, the Stanford EA group was pretty legendary. It included the person I mentioned before, Buck Schlegris, who's the CTO of Redwood, and also a fund manager at the Infrastructure Fund. Claire Zabel, who leads the Open Philanthropy Long-Termist Community Building team. Caroline Ellison, who's now a major EA funder and co-CEO of Alameda Research. Kelsey Piper, who's the world's first full-time journalist on topics of effective altruism. And Nate Thomas, the CEO of Redwood Research. So in 2015, all of these people were at Stanford, which was pretty crazy. The amount of impact that ended up having. And now, Stanford 2022, as I mentioned, is also a flourishing group that has grown a ton during the pandemic. It's producing Kuhans and Mauricios and Sydneys. If you know them, they're all doing really great community building, entrepreneurship, having a huge impact. However, in the time in between, in 2016 to 2020, Stanford went dark and only had one full-time person, or one person that was there. They weren't working yet. There were probably so many Bucks and Claires and Mauricios and Sydneys and Kuhans that we missed out on because there wasn't a group there. And every time that we have a university that doesn't have a group there, we're missing out on this type of people. And it seems really like a tragic loss of impact. So just to summarize, I think that colleges currently are failing ambitious do-gooders, since students are hearing about, the Goldmans and the Facebooks and McKinseys, and that's the messaging that they get if they want to be ambitious. There's so much impact at stake. I mean, I didn't cover this as much, but this entire conference is about how much impact is at stake. But we also think that in particular at universities, it's very important. You have a really exciting opportunity to be an expert at this point in your life. Community building has really transferable skills and career capital that's extremely useful, but isn't for everyone, as we talked about. But you can test out whether it's right for you by doing the things that I talked about. Thank you. Great. So I think we have a little bit of time for questions. So if you have questions, you can come up to the mic and ask it. Great.
So, ooh, that's loud. One of the questions I would have, I guess, is when you're talking about like Stanford in 2015 and like all of those people there, it seems like a very different environment than the Stanford of like 2021 or like the Stanford that we will see, because it was like smaller. I mean, as a club, the EA club, it was smaller. It was like maybe less formal, it seemed, and stuff like that. And so are you worried at all that the kind of communities we're building now aren't the kinds of ones that would produce, these very successful people who are having like a huge impact?
Yeah, this is a good question. I think it's a bit of an open question that I'm excited for people to figure out. Right now, it seems like we are producing people like this. The problem with the like really small group format was that it led to there not being a group because they weren't growing. So that's one thing that you have to consider in doing that. I think one thing that a lot of universities are trying to do is form spaces within their bigger groups where they can have smaller groups, such as that smaller group. So maybe if you have a in-depth group that meets once a week, and it's the people who are the most highly engaged and maybe more likely to do this, and then that way you get the benefits of that, but are also still growing as a university and hopefully still going to continue after they all graduate.
Really enjoyed this. Ooh, that is a hot mic. So one thing that you talked about was that some people were interested in trying, like they wished they'd gotten into EA when they were like 16. And do you see value in doing more work to try to build the pipeline, like from high school into EA college groups? And if so, what do you think would be a good idea for that?
Yeah, I think all of us are really excited about the high school pipeline. I think there's actually like a high school meetup or something happening right now. There's some really exciting opportunities in the space, such as the Atlas Fellowship. Right now, there are some considerations with high schoolers where it's, you're working with people who are under 18. There's, more vetting that needs to be done for people who are working with it. And it seems a bit more challenging to have the experts be the people who are doing it. But it's definitely an area we're super excited about.
I know you gave the data for the number of groups on college campuses for spring of 21 and fall of 21. Do you have any data for spring of 22 or?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the University Group Accelerator program, it piloted last fall with like 7 groups. Then we reached out just to the groups that had already reached out to CEA. So there's 30 groups participating in that right now. So that leads me to probably think that it's somewhere near 80 groups that are running these fellowships this semester. It's a rough guess.
Hi. Do you know if any of the resources for groups has been translated to other languages? And if not, do you think that would be a worthwhile project?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think so. There is a Spanish-speaking EA community that's working on translating a bunch of like EA content, and I think they've been doing a bit of the group's resources as well. I think in general, like people in EA are really excited about translating EA content. Seems pretty reasonable to me to also be excited about translating this content too. Yeah.
How can somebody who no longer attends college support their local university group?
So is the question like after you graduate and what are the opportunities there? Or is it like I've graduated and I like left and I'm doing something else, can I still support it?
The second one.
The second one? Yeah, I mean, you can still act as a mentor for your group. You can act as, especially if you have already built more connections within the EA space, you can have your current community builders that are at the university connect, promising students with you to advise them. The Yale Effective Altruism Group has had alums come back and give talks at the school, which is an option as well. I think that it's really nice to keep the community going and having these like alumni reunions and stuff too. So those are some possible options. Be curious if you have ones too.
Hi. For the reasons why you might or might not want to become an organizer that you listed, which of those seem particularly hard to self-assess? Are you worried about that as like a reason people who should become organizers might not, or vice versa? And how could you maybe test that without having to just do it introspectively?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that the opportunity cost is really hard to tell. I think that this kind of goes on both sides. I think a lot of people sometimes like overestimate the opportunity cost, or really they're like underestimating how impactful the community building could be right now, and whether they could delay other things or do other things at the same time. I think talking to experts in the field and just asking them for their opinion, I think in the version for like AI safety stuff, talking to top AI safety researchers and just like frankly asking them, they have pretty good models on both the value of community building and things like AI safety research. So you can go up and be like, these are my options I'm weighing out. What are my opportunity costs? And they get really good feedback. Then there's things like knowing if you're like good at this or not. I think that this can be challenging, and it can be especially challenging to like identify if you aren't particularly good at it. I mean, it depends. Some people like overestimate their abilities, and a lot of people underestimate at the same time. I think if you have mentors or people within the EA community that you can ask for feedback based off of your progress, the really nice thing about the EA community is they're very honest and like helpful. So those are probably my best guesses.
Thank you.
I think one more question. Cool.
This is more of a comment, but I'm excited to see the relationships between university groups and organizations that are EA aligned in terms of like recruitment of students.
Yeah, definitely.
Is that something that you're working on?
Yeah, so that's not something that like CEA is particularly working right now on, other than things like hosting events like this, where those organizations get to meet organizers and organizers get to learn about what those organizations are doing. I'd be like pretty excited to see more collaboration in this space. Are you asking or commenting from the point of view of like a person at a university or a person at an org, or?
I'm at a workplace that may or may not appreciate that because of the potential to have them leave the workplace. But yeah, it's just something that I don't hear about a lot in terms of university groups, so I thought I would mention.
Sorry, so were you commenting about workplace groups, like workplace EA groups?
Oh, yeah, I mean, I work at Bloomberg, and so there's sort of a workplace group there, but it's like, that would be a sticky situation, like whether they would want to do that sort of recruiting. But yeah.
Yeah.
It's an interesting space.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, great. Okay, so I'll stay around here for a bit. I think we have to take a group picture at some point soon, so do that. But happy to answer questions, happy to be around, and thanks for joining, and really exciting to see all of the people that you help and influence and the impact that you're about to go have. Thank you.